is good, everyone? This is your host, Deanna Kuempel with Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. I'm super excited. We've got a really cool guest, especially here in the podcasting space. He is a podcast and talk show talent coach. He helps mission-driven entrepreneurs and thought leaders create amazing and unique podcasts. Please welcome Michael Sharkey. He's joining us from Mexico. A little jealous there, Michael. Thank you for joining us today. Can you please introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, first of all, I have to say congratulations to you for going all in on this podcast thing. I heard an interview where you were talking in one of your previous episodes about how you're doing this. So congrats to you for doing that. But yeah, this is what I do. I started in broadcast radio for many, many, many years, both on the radio as well as a talk show host. But really my favorite job was helping others create really entertaining and fun content. Got to work with some really big name talk show hosts. And then about 7 years ago, I decided, hey, there's a thing happening and they're called podcasts. And I want to be a part of that. And I kind of shifted, like I said, about 7 years ago to helping really entrepreneurs, because it's people that have something to say. And what I try to encourage people as a coach is that you can have a podcast for your business and you can monetize it and you can do all those tactical things. But what people really want is they want to have a relationship and they want to have a connection. Yeah. So when you do a podcast, sure, tell people what you do and what offers, et cetera, do interviews, have conversations, but don't forget to tell people who you are as a human being. So I try to make sure when I talk about unique podcasts, it's giving people the permission, the license to go into their podcast and maybe tell a story that is sometimes uncomfortable, tell a story that shows people who they really are. And I think that when people do that, you have an opportunity to really, really make a difference.
Absolutely. And that's the whole reason why I started this podcast. And we had a conversation before we got going here. And when I created this, and you met my booking manager Julie and talked to her.
She's great.
Yeah, she's awesome. I had started wrapping up. I wanted to get into fashion, so I did that. I went after my dream. It really wasn't where I would rather be a style icon and fashion diva, whatever you want to call it, instead of being an actual designer and make my own clothes. So I did 3 collections and I brought it to a close and I was like, okay, what's next? And so I really didn't know what a podcast was either. And so I got an article, an email that said how to start a podcast for under $100. I read it. I was like, that's it.
I'm doing that.
And I've said this many times on here. You guys know that I say this a lot. I'm an open book. I was like, I don't know who the fuck I think I am, but I'm doing this. And so
right.
Julie and I talked and I said to her, over the last 5, 10, whatever years, I have had to deal with, a lot of labels being put on me and having to break out of those. I was married, my husband passed away. So I had to deal with the label of a widow. And that's
right.
that's really tough. And I didn't realize how much that affected me until I started dating again. And it really scared a lot of men away. And I was like, shit, that really sucks. And that's just a part of my story. That doesn't define me, who I am.
It's not your whole story.
Right, exactly. And I also am, and I'm going to say, I'm not full of myself, but I'm also a very sexy woman. And I get labeled for that, because I dress a certain way. I know how to accent my body. And I'm like, well, that's not who I am either. It's just the way I like to dress. It's what God gave me, thank you.
Right.
But that does not define me either. There's so much more to us. There's so much more depth to who we are as individuals that I just want, I'm like, I don't want to live with these labels and I don't care what anybody thinks because I'm just going to continue to do me. And if they want to put this and that on me, that's not my problem. That's theirs.
That's theirs.
So we created Label Free Podcast and it's just been an incredible journey. And like you said, helping people. Just yesterday, I got an email that someone commented on the podcast, on my podcast, on an episode off of Podbean, which I wasn't even active on there, but I went and claimed my podcast and I responded to the audience member. And I was just like, the show helped them. And that's really what, like you said, helping people. I'm here to serve. If I can create a platform for you to tell your story that can help someone else, then we've done our job.
Absolutely. And when I hear you speak both in episodes and then in this conversation, you do exude a confidence about you. It's not an arrogance, but it's a confidence that comes from a very pure place. And I think the origination of your podcast comes from a very pure place. And when I work with people, what I really, really try to encourage them is that, look, when you hit that wall of, oh, I can't do that. I can't tell that story, or I can't do that. And look, I understand certain things you don't want to tell and certain things are off limits, but having a deeper understanding of your contribution and how you can serve people helps people. And what I always say to people when they hit that fear wall or that fear barrier is, if you're feeling it, if you're feeling something inside of you that needs to come out, what that feeling really is there's a whole group of people somewhere in this world who are aching to find what it is you have to say.
Yeah.
So by not saying it, you're actually doing a disservice to the people that need to hear it. So again, I applaud you having just the desire, I think you said the what the fuck, let's do it, to do it. You know what I mean? Because sometimes it just takes that. And as we start to break these barriers down, and look, I listen to a lot of podcasts, as we all know, there's a lot of good podcasts and there's a lot of not so good podcasts out there. But I think what I can do, and when I help people, is try to get to a place where they find that moment of courage, that moment of vulnerability that ultimately not just impacts them as they share their story, but the others that are listening.
And you know what? It was really hard when I did my first episode, was my intro episode, the very first one. I was like, holy shit, this is hard. I think I had to record it like 10 to 15 times and I had to drink some wine that night because I was just like, it is, you really are being very vulnerable and you're putting yourself out there, and it's, you have to decide, like, I'm just going to face this fear. If you have, like you said, if you have the desire to let your voice be heard, then you have to chase it. You have to do it because there's a reason why you're feeling that way. And to be honest with you, I've talked about a lot of things in my past on this podcast I never thought I'd have the courage to say or to share. But the second that I did that and I put it out there for the world to hear, I was scared for sure, and I was afraid of like what the whiplash would be like, or the judgment would be. I had such a sense of relief. And I know that me telling my story helped a lot of other people. And now there are no more skeletons in my closet.
Right. Starting to dig through the back of the closet saying, oh gosh, what did I forget? Let me get this all out there. Come on. This is good. This is therapy.
Exactly. It is a form of therapy, especially for myself and for others. And it's just been such an exciting journey. So I guess I want to pivot a little bit and talk about how you getting into the space and what it looked like 7 years ago versus what it looks like now.
Yeah. I mean, 7 years ago was very, it's interesting because a lot of the perspective that I come from was being in broadcast radio for 20 years. So from that perspective, I went to radio stations when I took a sabbatical in 2014. So when I re-entered the atmosphere, as I like to say, I came back and I went right back to the radio industry and I said, hey, podcasts are going to be this big thing. They're going to be this big thing. And I got laughed out of the room by every major radio company because what they believed at the time was, oh, podcasts are just this thing like, guys do in their basement when they want to talk about, what their favorite bourbon is, or, people, just friends talking, or software engineers. I mean, it really kind of podcasts really started in the software engineering space many, many years ago. So there was this sort of like, brushing it off. But as I started to look around, there were so many people, outside of that industry that saw podcasts the same way that we in the radio industry saw the work that we did. The same thing, like, wow, I can talk into a microphone. It'll go out to however many people. It could be tens, it could be millions. Right. And I can have an impact with the sound of my voice. So 7 years ago, it was this thing, as I said, in our pre-call, it's like I had to answer the question what a podcast was. It was a thing. It was on your phone and you could listen to it. And I had to show people. Like if you have an iPhone, there's an app that you can't delete. It's called Podcast. You've got to go there, I remember showing like very tech savvy people. Like, what do you mean? What do you do? So, so a lot of the work that I did 7 years ago was almost this education, and a lot of people in this industry. There's a lot of people that have, In 2012, which was sort of the watershed year, that's when the podcast app was made native on iPhones. That was a big moment for podcasts.
Yeah.
But what you saw in like 2012 to 2015 was a lot of people get started. Joe Rogan started in 2011. A lot of the bigger names like Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas, these guys all started in the marketing space. They started around that time. But what we're seeing today is now you've got people, you can do it for free. You can do it for $100. I mean, the free offer that I have is called my podcast roadmap, which kind of maps everything to how people get to where they want to go with their podcast. And what I always recommend is, you can invest a very small amount of money, like a couple of $100, and you can have a studio that sounds as good as Joe Rogan's or sounds as good as your favorite talk show host on the radio, just because technology allows that. So we're in a really, really exciting time now where your podcast, regardless of your content, your subject matter, whatever you decide to do, can be on the same page as the biggest names in podcasting, and you can sound as good as the biggest names in podcasting. And I just think that's an amazing place for people to be at right now.
Sure. It gives people another opportunity to get their message out there, to get their name out there, their brand out there. It's just been, for me, it's just been super exciting because it's just been very organic, and that I have been embraced very well in this community because it is a community, and it's becoming very strong. And I've noticed that most podcasters are really wanting to support each other. And
Yes.
And it's been very refreshing to be in the space and have that kind of welcome and to experience my own success with it along the way.
Yeah, and I'll add to that is something that I don't see going away, is that the podcasters supporting podcasters. There's a great convention every year called Podcast Movement. I've been to it a few times. It's coming up in August, I believe. And what you see when you go to that particular event is what you just said in real, like person to person.
Yeah.
That regardless of your content, regardless, you could have two people. You could have two people with very, very opposing views on, could be politics or religion or whatever, sitting right next to one another, having a wonderful conversation about how they have this medium that allows them to tell a story or to gain listeners or to encourage or inspire or educate people. And there's just such commonality that, supporting podcasts is a huge thing in this industry. And I think that is something that's part of just sort of the foundation of it. Kind of when it started 7, 8, 9 years ago, it was almost like an unwritten rule. It's like, look, I'm going to help you, you help me. Like, you're going to air this podcast and then I'm going to replay it on my podcast because I want people to be introduced to your podcast.
Yeah.
Because that's how we grow. That's how we grow as a community and as a medium, and how we are able to really make a difference. And not to get so big, but I believe we actually have that power, that this cool little organic, fun media called podcasting that anyone can do at any time can have the power to really start to affect change in our world. And I think we are seeing that. I think we're seeing that with some of the bigger names right now. I think we're seeing that with people's lack of trust in mainstream media and things like that.
Hey guys, Deanna here. I'm taking a quick break to share an exciting opportunity with you. I have recently partnered with Scotsman. They have created a crowdfunding campaign building 3D printed electric scooters that make transportation smart, elegant, and sustainable. It runs on energy efficient batteries that double as USB-C power banks. And they're swappable too, so you can replace your battery and keep your scooter. Check out their crowdfunding page down below. Hurry and sign up now to take advantage of their early bird prices, 50% off. It has a built-in camera, GPS, live maps, and an automatic lock. So hurry up now, get in on this. Go to my special link below, 50% off, and be a part of this really cool campaign. You won't be disappointed. I love it. You're going to give me goosebumps over here. And I almost kind of like brings like good tears to my eyes. I'm a woman. I'm a little emotional occasionally, but when it touches my heart, hey, I'm just going to roll with it. And I totally agree. And I'm going to try to go to that podcast movement because I was doing the virtual one. Was it earlier this year?
It would have been with COVID. That would have been last year, I think.
Last year. And I was like, holy crap, there was over 30,000 people that
Yeah.
were participating in that. And I was like, this is really cool. And I'm like, I feel great that I'm a part of it. So as a coach for
Mhm.
different people that are wanting to start a podcast or have a podcast, what does it look like when you start working with them and to get them to the where they need to be and find the success that they're looking for?
So a lot of it, a lot of people will come to me at different stages in where they're at. And what I always bring it back to is the very first thing is, are you talking about what you want to talk about? I know we're going to talk about links at the end, but the podcast roadmap that I have, the very first stop on it, um, is, are you talking about what you want to talk about? So whether you're 100 episodes in or you just got started, I want to make sure that when you make a decision, just like you and Julie did, when you make a decision to do a podcast, that you are doing it for the reasons that most sort of inspire you as a person. I think a lot of people are starting podcasts right now, and they're like, especially in the entrepreneur space, because that's most of the people that I work with. How do I tie my podcast into my business? How do I make money with it? How do I grow my business with it, et cetera? But they feel like they have to do something. Well, I'm in marketing, therefore I should do a marketing podcast.
Right, right.
And what I tell people is, actually, no, that's not the case at all. Is the most important thing you've got to make sure is, are you doing episodes every single time that you really want to do? Like, first and foremost, is this what you want to do?
Yeah.
And some people have come to me saying, yeah, I want to do a podcast. And after we do the first session, they actually get done and go, you know what? Podcasts aren't for me. And that's okay. But it's really about, like, I just started that sort of that, I'm going to call it ground zero, but I started at the very, very beginning, which is, are you talking about what you want to talk about? Because if you're not, then, what we see is 45% of all podcasts fade after about episode 6. And that's
Yeah.
normally because people don't prepare, and people aren't really, they're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what I'm talking about, so I'm just going to start talking. But if hey, I really, really want to talk about, like I do a podcast, 100 and something episodes in, where this is all I talk about, just coaching people, because this is kind of what I do, and I really, really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Like, I really, really enjoy this. Like, hey, let's talk about how to do this one aspect of your podcast better, or whatever. I enjoy it. So for me, it's no issue going in and recording a new episode or doing an interview.
Yeah.
The story I like to tell is, one of my clients is a CEO of a big marketing firm. And when I sat down with her name was Andy. When I sat down with her, I said, all right, Andy, you want to do a podcast? So I've got some ideas, we can talk about digital marketing strategies or Facebook. And she goes, I do not want to talk about marketing. And I was like, well, Andy, you're the CEO of a marketing company.
Yeah.
And we just talked for 45 minutes. And about 45 minutes in, I could see her eyes light up and her face light up when she talked about how important it was to treat her employees with dignity and with class and with love. And I said, you're onto something there. And she goes, like, what are you talking about? Well, lo and behold, her podcast ended up turning out to be a podcast about what it means to run a mission-driven business, what it means to treat employees right. It had nothing to do with marketing, but the outset of that is she attracted clients now to her marketing agency that were people she wanted to work with.
Yeah.
So I use that as an example, that it's like, look, you got to do a podcast first and foremost about your passion, what you care about in the world. And then, you know what? We'll figure out ways to tie it into your business, or business will just organically come because you're talking about the thing you want to talk about.
Yeah. And so when you're saying that, I realize that what I've realized is that with the podcast, people want to connect with you. They want to connect with you, who you are, your authentic, organic self. And when you're not being that, I feel like that is, if she was to stay focused on marketing with her podcast, I think she wouldn't have gotten the result that she's gotten now, when she talked about something that she's passionate about, which really is allowing people to connect with her, who she is as a person, who she is as a leader. And that's, that's where the value is. That's where the value is. I mean, I want people to connect with me. I want them to know my story. That's why when I have my guests on, I talk to them like we're talking now, and I tell you my experience, this, that, and the other thing. They're going to know that I'm being real, that I'm being authentic, and that they're going to always get that from me, and that they can trust me. And so if I was to start selling something, maybe they would buy.
Well, and that's it. I mean, speaking to the fact that, when entrepreneurs come to me and I say, well, look, you can build connection, you can build trust with potential customers, that tends to on a first meeting kind of go in one ear and out the other. But everything you just said is 100% accurate. And especially if you were saying, okay, well, I'm going to use a podcast to try to be a traffic building system for my business or whatever you want, is it really comes back to connection and trust. If somebody has trust in you, they're like, I don't know, some statistic, but it's like 26 times more likely to purchase from you if they have trust.
Yeah.
Well, podcasts by their design, and again, I geek out on this because it's been my entire career, but the way people listen to podcasts, same way people listen to radio for, decades, but that experience is so intimate. That experience in and of itself is such a, I always explain to people, if you're just a, if you're just a podcast listener and you've got your iPhone or you got your phone and you throw your headphones on and you go to listen to a podcast, the moment you hit play on that podcast, it's like the whole world shuts out.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it's just the host and the listener. That's it. So what can happen in that moment is magic. What can happen in that moment is you can inspire people, you can empower people. Yes, you can make money and you can do all those business things that you should do if you're an entrepreneur, but it's honoring what that moment really is and understanding that power of spoken word. That's where podcasts are like, whoa, this is really, really powerful stuff. And when you use it in the same way that I would honor what you're doing something where you can really get a message out there that can help people to go, hey, you know what? I don't have to live with a label. I can be label free. That's the kind of stuff that, for every comment that you get on a Podbean or your Apple podcast or whatever, just know there's, 10 to 20 times more people who are never going to comment who are feeling that way. So those comments are just the tip of the iceberg of what people are really thinking and saying around your podcast. And that's true for you and for everyone.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And that is what is the most rewarding for me. And, having the label free podcast, it means so many different things for so many people. And that's why I have the opportunity to talk to such a diverse crowd and share their story, share their journey. And, a lot of them are entrepreneurs like you. You're a coach. I talk to a lot of coaches, and every coach I talk to is such a different, the way they go to market, who their avatar is. And it's just been, I learn a lot. Like I get an education every time I talk to one of my guests. And it's just, there's just so much value, and it's just been such a great experience. And, I can see why, and you're not the first person that I've heard that said that most podcasters fail within the first couple episodes, because there's a lot, you have to be really committed and really passionate about doing this, and you have a schedule of releasing, and it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. It's not just like,
Yeah,
it takes some time
it is. And I always tell people it's a lot, it's a decent amount of work. If you know what you're doing and you've got a plan and you can put it together, it's a very doable amount of work. I think a lot of overwhelm is something I see a lot.
Yeah.
I see fear a lot and I see overwhelm a lot. I call myself your podcast coach for a reason, because coaching is a huge part of what I do. It's not just here's how to plug in a microphone or here's how to set up your podcast hosting account. It's understanding what to do when fear sets in. It's understanding what to do when overwhelm sets in. So yeah, it is a lot of work, and the work is maintaining it and doing it consistently. But again, I look at, what you do. You've got somebody who screens your guests.
Yeah.
Great move, because the kind of person you're going to have on. You've set, and if I'm correct, you record Monday, Wednesday, Friday, according to what you said in your Calendly link.
Yeah.
Those are great things to do. Some type of preparation before the interview, regardless if you do it or if somebody else does it. And then saying, hey, look, I'm only going to record interviews on these days. I only do podcast content on my stuff on Mondays.
Okay.
I do it on one day a week, get it all done. Feels great. When the day is done, I'm like, cool. I can go about the rest of my week, because I know that all of that is done. So yeah, it is a lot of work, but there's ways to make it very manageable and very successful, long-term. It's a marathon, not a sprint. I always say that as well. Get into it knowing you're doing this for not 6 episodes, but 60 or 600. The biggest podcasts are all in those 4-figure, 1,000 episodes plus. And you don't get there in one day. You've got to get
No.
there over time.
Yeah, I'm releasing 4 times a week, but I mean, that's just because I'm recording so much, um, and I love it, and I wish I could release every day, but that would just be a lot. But so one last okay, so before you plug all your links, one last piece of advice for someone that might be wanting to start out in, um, or thinking about starting a podcast.
I go back to what I said a minute ago. Just really sort of ask yourself, what is it that I want to talk about? And ask yourself if you really want to do it. It's interesting. One of my clients who was a coach himself, very big in the fitness world. I kind of asked him the question you just asked me. What advice would you give somebody just starting? And he said, talk yourself out of it. And if you can't talk yourself out of it, then you need to do it. And I thought that was really interesting. And I had a moment like, well, that's very counterintuitive. I'm trying to actually
Yeah,
attract customers into my life, and you're telling them to talk to, but it's true. Really just, it's such a great medium. I mean, look, it's all the things we've talked about. It's intimate, it's therapy, but by the end of the day, it's fun. It's
yeah,
fun to do this. You get to have conversations with people you never would have met. You get to share the wisdom that you have. I'm a big believer that we all sort of walk around this planet, 7.8 billion of us, all having a unique contribution to share with others. So a podcast, if you can kind of dive into what your unique contribution is, gives you a platform to be able to share that. But if I'm talking to somebody that's thinking about it, that's like, yeah, I kind of want to do it, I would stop them and go, really just, take a moment. Think about, what do you want to talk about? And are you willing to go there?
yeah,
Are you willing to go there to be vulnerable and honest with your audience? If you're just starting, I say this in my workshops, if you are a person who is coming to me because you want to, quote, check the podcast box off of your marketing strategy, I'm not your guy.
yeah,
There's plenty of places out there. You can buy a million different courses. You can find videos on YouTube. But if what you want is to say, look, I've got something in my belly that is trying to come up, that is I believe an important message, and I can tie that message into the work that I do every day, because this one thing that I do, I potentially do it better than anyone else on the planet, or one of a few small people that do this one thing well. And this is my contribution. And a podcast can be that. Like if you feel like that something is inside of you, then that's that voice that other people are trying to find as well. So I always encourage people just to kind of dive a little deeper before you go buy a microphone and you spend money on equipment or set up a podcast hosting account.
I love that. That was beautifully put, and I couldn't agree anymore. I did buy the microphone and all that stuff, and I think Zoom has been working out just fine for me. So I did have all that in the beginning, and I was using it. I'm like, this is kind of cheesy. I'm just gonna do me. But
Hey, it
um,
works.
yeah, whatever work, to each his own, and you got to find what works for you and your process and all that. And this has been. I have like a million more questions, but maybe we'll have to do a part two, Michael,
Sure.
because
Anytime.
I'm loving what you have to say, and our views are aligned, and I love it. So can you please plug all your links? I will put those in the show notes, and people can know where to find you. But just rattle them off really quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah, there's only one. And if you go to and I set this up specifically for our conversation, if you go to yourpodcastcoach.com/label free, it's just yourpodcastcoach.com/label free, name of your podcast. I'm going to give you my podcast roadmap. It's a free roadmap that, as I talked about a couple of times, it'll give you sort of points on the journey, where to begin, what to do next, getting studio stuff set up, hosting, all the way into once you launch, what to do after you launch. And again, most of the people I work with are coaches and entrepreneurs and things like that. So it definitely leans a little like, here's a good time to start getting your name out there, going to get on other podcasts and things like that. But it's a roadmap. It's literally a roadmap that says, okay, well, if I start here, or if you've already started, you can kind of jump into the podcast roadmap in the middle and go, okay, well, I'm 20 episodes in, so then I probably should start doing this or this or this. So it's a good sort of like, if you're thinking about it, or if you have some questions, the podcast roadmap is a great way to get those answered. And again, it's just yourpodcastcoach.com/label free, which is a page I'm going to have set up just for all of your listeners that listen today and want to grab that for free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. This has been, and I have like a million more questions, but we're gonna do part two
Sure.
because we're coming up on the time. So thank you so much for being a guest. You have offered some very valuable information, and it was just a great conversation with you. And I look forward to having you back. You guys, this is your host, Deanna Kuempel of Label Free Podcast. To live your best life, you must live label free. Please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share, follow, all those good things. And I'll be back soon with more dynamic guests.